Thank you for having me at your monthly meeting. I have to admit, some surprise me standing here today because when Ben asked me to speak, I had to resist the urge to respond with, "Me? You do understand I'm on the starving artist end of the spectrum, right?" But I got over that pretty darn quick and simply said yes. Then I still had to ask Ben what is it exactly he wanted me to talk about, and he said I should speak on my experience as a writer and my processes. And so I figured with that, let's jump in at it. So where to begin? I suppose with myself, if you didn't know before I started my ramblings, my name is Brice Odom. I'm Georgia born and raised, but have bounced from here to the metro and back again. I'm both a bear and a bobcat, and have been for the most of the last decade an educator. Perhaps surprisingly, I'm a social studies teacher rather than an English teacher, given I'm here to talk about, well, writing. But in terms of me as a writer, where do I start? Even that has so many places I could choose from. I go back to my days as a small child, where I had distinct memories dictating a story about a lava monster to my granny as she clanked it out on her typewriter. Or the stories of Adventure Max that I wrote throughout my grammar school years, and unlike my writing skills over the years, my illustration skills did not advance with me. Or how about the sports histories of the teams we made in our yards? Or the fantastical stories I started writing in middle school? Or those first stories in high school where I was really trying to write something of quality? Or perhaps when writing a detective story in college titled Nasty, Brutish, and Short, I finally thought I hit that level. And you can actually read that story in my first short story collection. And if you understand political science, and you'll know where that title comes from, and it'll give you a bit of a hint of what happens at the end of the story. But if you didn't notice from my long list of false starts, I have been doing this since I basically could read and write. I don't know if the word prolific applies, but by keeping at it for so long, I have racked up quite the scorecard. And I've got plentiful short stories, many poems, some small and personal that will never see the light of day, and some longer narrative poems that I hope will see the light of day. And I've even tried my hand at novels a handful of times. But as you'll also notice on the scorecard, there is a wide gulf between what has been produced and what has been published. This is a hobby and a profession in which the most common answer is no, as I clearly have a lot of experience with that outcome, as you can see here. So then maybe we should backtrack to why. Why, given all the rejection and the times when it would have been so easy to move on and to try something else, did I not do so? Why on God's green earth do I keep writing? So in terms that make me seem a little more intelligent, I'll quote the poet Rilke. This, most of all, ask yourself in the most silent hour of your night. Must I write? Dig into yourself for a deep answer. And if this answer rings out in assent, if you meet this solemn question with a strong, simple, I must, then build your life in accordance with this necessity. Your whole life, even into its humblest and most indifferent hour, must become a sign and witness to this impulse. Then come close to nature. Then, as if no one ever tried before, try to say what you see and feel and love and lose. Now, just so you know, I did not just Google a fancy quote about writing. In fact, this is my copy up there on the screen from where this quote came from. But to put all that into layman's terms, I just have to. So since I have no other choice, where do I begin a story? There are so many possibilities for inspiration. There's not just one source. But first, and above all else, if one is going to be a writer, you need to consume stories. Read a bunch of authors in different styles. My favorite author is J.R.R. Tolkien, writer of amazing world-building fantasy and florid prose. But my second favorite writer is Michael Shara, who wrote diverse books like The Killer Angels, which, if you're familiar with the movie Gettysburg, that movie is based off of The Killer Angels, or For Love of the Game, which they adapted into the Costner film. But those books were written in clean and simple language. These are two very different authors, but they both gave me a love of world building and the confidence that a good story can be told without bold and high language. But also, watch movies. I would recommend the great classics that have stood the test of time, like noir films such as The Maltese Falcon or the epics like Ben-Hur. They all teach us something about storytelling, and they combine and mix and merge ideas in the subconscious of your brain to be used in new ways. Second, most importantly, is to be present in the world around you. Observe people's reaction to situations, how they shift impatiently while they wait in line. Observe the things around us like the drops of condensation slowly trailing down the side of your glass. All of our life and experience and emotions combine with these to create original stories. Just so there's so many ways to have inspiration, there are many ways to write a story. So here are the basics as I see it. And again, this is how I see it, because if you read anyone talking about how to write, they're all going to have different answers to this. But for me, the longer works, yes, you should absolutely come up with a plan. Now, I'm not overly detailed with my plans, but I do try to create a general plot outline, and I fill in the blanks as I write. For shorter works, I usually don't have any well thought out plan. I usually have the image or a scene that I have firmly in my head. I'm trying to write to it and put the pieces together along the way about why that scene exists. Setting goals, whether a timetable or a word minimum or even a word maximum, can help the mind and creativity toward achieving the desired end. But then you got to do anything you can to find a groove. Type, handwrite, drink tea, drink a beer, work in a cozy position on the couch or a quiet place in the office or in the bustling public of a coffee shop or a bar. Find a flow and keep it going. And you do have to keep it going. You have to keep writing. Now, I'm a school teacher by day, so I don't get to write every day. Sometimes my brain is just tired and I can't do it. But you got to keep trying. But even when you keep trying, you get to the end of the story, you're not actually done. Then you have to edit, polish it a little bit. Let someone read it. Choose someone you trust to read it so they'll give you good feedback. And then edit and polish again. But that is in general. I thought it'd be a good idea to take a look at a couple of my own works as case studies to show this variation. So let's start with the most recent book, because this was a trip. Moonlight and the Tombstones came about because of a contest. Amazon was trying to push its ultimately failed serialized story platform called Kindlevella. They opened up a 2-month contest window, and I didn't know about it until 1 month into it. And it was also 2 days before my students showed up. So if any of you are a teacher or know a teacher, you know that when the school year starts, there is a window of time, very brief, at the beginning of the year before the school year completely overtakes you. And so I thought, I have basically 6 days, but the contest came with the minimums. It needed 10 chapters, and it needed a minimum of 10,000 words. I figured, okay, if I'm going to do this, I've got to start right now. So I brainstormed titles, and I like fantasy, so I was thinking maybe a werewolf story would be a really good one. So I came up with a title, but thought, Moonlight and the Tombstones. Oh, no. This is film noir. And I started to brainstorm chapter titles and a couple sentence blur for each to plan, and then I was off. And I basically nothing but go to work, come home, eat, and then write until I went to bed. And the end result was this novella you see here. The plan actually mostly stayed in place, but the deadline and minimums created an alchemy of creativity that produced, I think, a really special little book. And the process is somewhat similar to the one I used in writing my other published novel, Letters from the Frontier. There were minimums that needed to be hit, and there were deadlines, which, if you can get yourself prepared for them, really does help. It was part of what's called NaNoWriMo, or National Novel Writing Month. Now, I was competing in or participating in this in an unofficial capacity, because if you're an actual participant, you should be trying to do 50,000 words in a month. But it's November when this happens, and again, I'm a school teacher. There was no way I was going to write 50,000 words in 1 month. Now, however, I did have an idea for an epistolary novel. In other words, a novel told in letters. I thought, well, I could give myself an achievable goal of writing 5 letters a day. And I came into it with a plan, but unlike Letters from the Frontier, I came to realize very quickly was this plan was just unworkable. It wasn't going to turn into this long novel-length story that I wanted it to. And most of the plan pretty much went out the window within a couple days. There was a couple things that survived. The villain, there was a big battle at the end that was kind of there all along. But for the most part, all the plan went out. So really, most of the story's made up as I went. The names in particular, where you can see that, anyone who had the rank of captain in the book, their name got pulled either from an actor or a character who was a captain in Star Trek. The place names also came. You can see where I was just pulling from a whole bunch of things. One of the main towns was a combination of 2 different Latin words. And therefore, every other town that was within that civilization needed to sound vaguely Latin. There was a childhood game that we invented one summer that I still think is actually a really good game. And if you are interested, read the book and you can see the game I'm talking about. But I pulled that into the book as a cultural characteristic. The name for the main town is kind of a riff off of a book title that was on my TBR title, which was called the town in the book is called Oxen Crossing. The title of the book was called Butcher's Crossing by John Williams, which I have now actually read and is actually very good. But despite all this improvisation, the novel, because I was just engaged constantly in it for a month, really actually managed to come in for a very soft landing and a really good conclusion. Now, I did spend the next year editing it and getting into shape, but it really did come together at the end, right as it was supposed to. Now, those are the published works, but I'd like to point to a couple unpublished works just to show you this combination of improvisation and planning, but also perseverance, which is important as well. So I wrote this one poem, which is in my collection, Grain of Sand, called Chains of Camelot. And it was a standalone poem about this one moment in King Arthur's story. And in fact, it was the 3rd time I attempted to tell this story, which was of that inevitable moment when Guinevere is nearly about to be killed and Lancelot comes to save her. And this time I finally did it. It was a long writing process of trying to find the right lines and stanzas and the flow, but I got it done. And I'm still very proud of this poem. And I thought maybe one day, perhaps, I might come back and write a couple poems that would go along with it spiritually, but not true prequels or sequels or anything like that. And then a few months later, I wrote this little sauna-like poem about the sword and the stone. And over a year after that, I wrote a poem about Arthur meeting Guinevere. I'm like, well, I could write another couple poems about their relationship, and it could go with the other kind of 2 spiritual connected poems to Chains of Camelot. And then I could write another couple little sonnet-like poems, and it'll be a good little 9 poem cycle. Except the plan didn't stay the plan. It kept expanding. Well, if I wrote this poem, then I need to do this. Well, since I wrote that, I should do this over here. And it just kept growing and growing until it went from 9 to 16, and it finally ended with 25 poems, as you can see here. The line count's actually longer than the poem Beowulf, so I'm always kind of proud of that fact. But the point is that this is what happens when planning changes over time. You have to be willing to go where your writing wants to take you. Go down that rabbit hole and have fun with it. Now, I also want to point out that creation doesn't have to be imposed by deadlines, but some discipline helps and is really at some point required. I wrote this unpublished piece called The Great Beast Cometh, kind of in the same planning style as Moonlight and the Tombstone. I wrote out chapter titles and little blurbs what needed to happen in each of those chapters. And I gave myself a minimum of how long those chapters should be. And I also said I want to try and write a chapter every 2 weeks. Now, I did not hit that goal. In fact, probably most of the chapters didn't hit that goal. But that was what I was trying to push myself to do. And by just holding myself to that goal and hope of 2 weeks, I kept pushing the novel forward and forward and forward until it was done. But this is also a really good work to talk about inspiration, how it comes in kind of weird places and from different things that combine to create something unique. I was watching a video essay on kaijus. It was on a YouTube channel called Overly Sarcastic Productions. If you got children who or grandchildren who are into history, they might have stumbled across this YouTube channel. But they were talking about the kaijus, which are just giant monsters to use as metaphors. And in other words, Godzilla. And it was really interesting to see how this metaphor contraption worked. And I thought, well, that's a really interesting trope that we see in cinema. But what would it look like in a literary context? But then the other thing that combined with that was actually I had watched that during lockdown, and as I was thinking about that, it was in those early days of the pandemic, and so the kaiju story that I want to tell actually follows 4 people who are in a room, and death is coming toward them inevitably, and there's not much they can do about it. And obviously, I can't see how lockdown possibly inspired a story like that. But the story ended up, I think, really working out really well. And also, I do want to point out, maps, when you do world building, maps really do help. This is a version of my map made much nicer by a friend of mine who's very talented at this. And it helps you keep track of, all right, so I went north. I said I'm going north, but didn't I say earlier in the book that that place was south of here? So maps really do help. And you can see this wonderful little map really did come in handy. Again, this is the spruced up version of my little map, but it came in handy as I wrote the book. But that's the writing process. Let's talk briefly before we end about the publishing process. My best success here comes in the short story world recently, but the thing to understand is that the short story market is not simple. There is an overwhelming variety of opinions and taste. Many publications have specific niches that they are looking for. And again, your most common answer is going to be no. In fact, I just before this, I gave the speech this past weekend, I got my most recent rejection. But the key is you have to find the place for your story. So you have to keep looking. That's the key. Keep looking. Find organizations you have common interests with. Do they have publications? Ask other authors for recommendations. Look for list after list of publications. Keep working on your craft. And then most importantly, keep sending story after story to magazines. And there's not much more to do than hope and pray. But I will tell you this. When you get that email saying, we would love to publish your story, I will shout for joy as if it were the first time, because that feeling just never gets old. With my books, I've gone through the self-publishing process, and in many ways, Amazon and others have made this easy. But it's also all on you. You're the writer, the editor, the cover designer, the marketer, the promoter. You have to keep pushing your own little bubble out. Make sure you have both a website and social media. Have business cards. Find vendor events. You see someone doing interviews, reach out and see if you can get on the schedule. Book of the month, can I get on that list? It is a continuous effort. And above all else, treat yourself seriously, because if you don't, no one else will. And you deserve to be taken seriously. And I just to illustrate this, I met an author very briefly one time, and I made a self-deprecating joke about being a self-published author, and they really just dismissed me out of hand because I wasn't taking myself seriously. I didn't think that was what I was implying, but that is clearly what they thought. So you take yourself seriously so other people will. Eventually, though, if you want to push into larger and larger markets without a severe amount of luck, you're going to need help. This can seem as overwhelming as looking for fiction magazines, but at some point you'll need either agents or publishers who help push your works out far and wide. And at this point in my career, that's what I need. But let me finish with this. Why do I think writing is so important? Because we should be creative, all of us. Creativity, or as Tolkien would call it, subcreation, is a spark of the divine within each of us. Whether it's writing fiction, history, painting, acting, cooking, athletics, or whatever else it may be, we must unleash this spark into the world. To fail to do so dims the light in our own soul. But if we pursue it with our utmost energy, then something truly magical happens. Even if we're never more successful than a footnote to a footnote to a footnote to a footnote. Creative expression is one of the most important ways that we can light the world around us. And that is, to put it simply, good. Thank you very much.